Emily Chang, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, Silicon Valley's most divisive voice stands his ground. Peter Thiel defends his support of Donald Trump and says he's not the only one. Plus, another blockbuster week of tech earnings. Everything you need to know before Facebook, Alibaba, and Square report results. And my exclusive interview with Khosla Ventures founder Vinod Khosla, his view on the future of work and the impact of machine learning and more. But first, to our lead. Silicon Valley investor and entrepreneur Peter Thiel opens up about his support for Donald Trump. At a National Press Club event in Washington, the billionaire businessman said the presidential nominee represents a new Republican Party.
No matter what happens in this election, what Trump represents isn't crazy, and it's not going away. He points toward a new Republican Party beyond the dogmas of Reaganism. He points even beyond the remaking of one party to a new American politics that overcomes denial, rejects bubble thinking, and reckons with reality.
Thiel has been a political lightning rod this election season, attracting scorn from Silicon Valley leaders who almost uniformly oppose the Republican presidential nominee. But despite criticism, Thiel recently increased his support by donating $1.25 million to Trump's campaign. Joining me now here in the studio, Bob O'Donnell, president and chief analyst at Technalysis Research, as well as our Bloomberg Tech Venture Capital reporter, Lizette Chapman. And it was interesting, as those allegations around sexual assault started rolling out about Donald Trump, Peter Thiel went in there and said, hey, I'm giving you more money. Anything surprising about what Thiel had to say today?
Yeah, for the first time, he talked about his donation. What he said was he didn't think money was a big issue in this campaign. He hadn't considered donating. They asked him to, and he did. He buttressed that with comments saying that, disproving what Trump had said and calling his comments and actions against women inappropriate and offensive.
Let's take a listen to that. Take a listen to what he had to say about Trump's actions, or at least alleged interactions with women.
Now, I don't agree with everything Donald Trump has said and done, and I don't think the millions of other people voting for him do either. Nobody thinks his comments about women were acceptable. I agree, they were clearly offensive and inappropriate.
Still, Bob, he's supporting him for President of the United States of America.
Well, look, regardless of, and I don't feel very positively about what he had to say, and certainly what Donald Trump has to say. The only comment I will make is there is an argument that's being made that there isn't a lot of diversity of opinion across Silicon Valley in tech. Now, again, I'm not saying this is the best way to do it, but it is interesting, and in the fundamental nature of American society, we've always had room for debate. And that's the only potentially positive thing I can say, but arguably that's a valid point that I think some people are trying to raise.
And look, there are others. Palmer Luckey, the founder of Oculus, for example, is a Trump supporter. However, the tweets definitely rolled in as this speech was ongoing. Katie Stanton, formerly of Twitter, now Color Genomics, tweeted, there's Peter Thiel, and then there's everyone else in tech. And then you had Brett Taylor, who is the CEO of Quip, used to be the CTO of Facebook, saying, listen to what he means, not what he says. Can't see any way that'll go wrong for financial markets and world leaders. What he's referring to there is something that Thiel said today about take Trump seriously, not literally. Don't literally listen to what he says, but think about what he means. What are we supposed to take away from that?
He did say that. I think that when he says build a wall, it means I don't know what he means by that.
It doesn't literally mean build a Great Wall of China. It just means I have different views on immigration than the current administration.
And the biggest thing that really came out, that jumped out of the speech for me, was his statement that he was surprised by how controversial his position was, and he said that he's done things that are far more far-fetched than this, yet this is the one where he actually agrees with about half of the country, yet he's taken the most flack for it. And then later on he said, business-wise, he's suffered very minimal blowback, which is also a curious statement given some of the comments and some of the things that we've reported on last week with venture firms and also some companies
and look,
severing ties.
You've had Mark Zuckerberg say that, he's going to maintain his seat on the board.
Right.
Jeff Bezos, CEO of Amazon, said it's a very dangerous road to walk down to even consider kicking somebody off the board simply because they have different political views.
Yeah.
I did speak to Chamath Palihapitiya, who used to work at Facebook for a long time, now runs his own fund, about this particular issue. Should companies separate themselves from Peter Thiel if they are associated with him and they don't believe in what he says? Take a listen.
I can speak to social capital, and look, we've decided that we're going to spend the time trying to create more equality for everybody and create a more bottoms-up world. And I think that is fundamentally about a positive view of inclusion and pluralism. And so I can't stand to work with people directly at social capital who would have views that have transcended politics, in my opinion, and have now entered this quite gray area that's bordering on hate. And I think that, for me, I would have a really difficult issue with it, but I can't.
So you would kick them off? You would kick him off?
For social capital, I think so. I mean, for example, like if it was Romney versus Obama, that's politics. I'm not so sure that this is politics anymore.
So he would kick him off the board.
Yeah, well, and I think other people may as well, right? I mean, right now we're in the throes of a lot of things going on. It'll be very interesting to see what is the situation like after the election, after things start to settle down a bit, presumably. Of course, there is that question. But presumably, then what happens? What's the reaction going to be like? And what is the long-term impact of these kind of developments? And I think there's a lot of questions because he's clearly upset a lot of people, both obviously Thiel and Trump. So.
And look, I've spoken to many of Peter Thiel's friends, longtime friends in the industry, Reid Hoffman, Keith Rabois, Jeff Lewis, who works at Founders Fund with him, and they all, even though they do not support Donald Trump, they continue to voice support for Peter Thiel and, respect, even though they disagree with him, they respect him as a person and respect his views.
Yeah.
Do you think, Lizette, that this is going to have any impact longer term on whether entrepreneurs want to take funding from Peter Thiel or Founders Fund or do business with him?
I think it's going to split depending on how fiercely some people feel one way or another. And, you've got the Sam Altmans and the Mark Zuckerbergs of the Sam Altman of Y Combinator and, of course, Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook saying, we support a difference of opinion and you have a right to support whatever political parties, whatever beliefs you have. And then you have other people on the other side saying, this is not just political beliefs, this is hate mongering. And that's something that Mr. Thiel did not address in his speech today was hate
Is
talk.
this going beyond politics?
Yeah.
Sort of what
He did a little bit with literally versus,
I think he was,
seriously,
I was going to say, I think he was
but
trying
I don't
to.
know.
But yeah, I mean, that's the problem. He didn't really say that, and that is where the line. I completely agree with Lizette. I think that's where the line gets drawn.
Right.
If you feel that this moves beyond politics, and then I think clearly it is going to have a longer term impact.
The bottom line, he says, is he thinks an outsider, or we need an outsider to fix the problems of the United States.
And interestingly enough, I don't think it would seem, if money is an indication, that Donald Trump was not Peter Thiel's first pick. He actually first donated to Carly Fiorina in this election and gave her $2 million.
He supported Ted Cruz early on, not necessarily in this particular election,
yes,
at least along the way.
And also he said that he wished this election would have been between Sanders and Trump. So clearly his vote is for an outsider. What that outsider looks like is the issue.
All right, Lizette Chapman, our Bloomberg Tech Venture Capital reporter, Bob O'Donnell of Technalysis, you're sticking with me. All right, coming up, staying with Peter Thiel, Palantir, the company he co-founded, is getting a second chance at a U.S. Army contract to build the next phase of its combat data system. A federal judge ruled Monday that the Army violated bidding rules by failing to consider commercially available options, effectively shutting out the Silicon Valley firm. The court has ordered the Army to reevaluate all tech systems, which puts Palantir back in the running. Still to come, another jam-packed week of tech company earnings. We'll break down everything you need to know ahead of Square and Facebook's results next. And a reminder, all episodes of Bloomberg Tech are now live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Bloomberg Tech TV, weekdays 6 p.m. in New York, 3 p.m. in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg. One story we are watching, Alibaba is doubling down on its entertainment bets with a new media group and a fund of nearly $1.5 billion. The new group consolidates Alibaba's media holdings from its video website, Youku Tudou, to Alibaba Pictures Group and its gaming and music units under the leadership of Yu Yongfu, the former CEO of Alibaba's web browser, UC Web. He'll report directly to Alibaba CEO Daniel Zhang. The change, part of Alibaba's effort to be more transparent in its earnings report. Time now for our weekly roundup of tech stories on our radar, including Alibaba. Another big week for earnings. Square on Tuesday, Alibaba and Facebook coming up later this week, Fitbit and a handful of video game makers across the next few days. And then on Friday, a key deadline for the $9 billion Oracle NetSuite deal that's now in doubt. Joining us now to go through the most important topics to watch, Technalysis Research President Bob O'Donnell still with me, as well as our Bloomberg Editor-at-Large, Corey Johnson. So we'll start with Square.
Yeah.
Last quarter actually was a good quarter for Square, not so much for Twitter, either quarter. But you know, it's apparently a high bar for Square to beat this time.
Look, I think that the biggest focus is going to continue to be the management issues for this company and whether or not Jack Dorsey can do a half-time job at two different companies, both of which need a full-time CEO, and when the change is going to happen, because it has to happen at some point. And that continues to be an overhang on the stock of both companies, and certainly the performance of Twitter and perhaps Square as well.
You know, the other question I have for Square, just briefly, is as we start to see the banks get much more involved with these sorts of transactions, the simpler, easier transactions, you know, they're coming from a position of power. Can they start to really weigh in on more than they actually have? They've kind of given Square a fair amount of running room, and the question is, will they start to catch up to them, and what will the long-term impact of that be?
So Alibaba coming up later this week. Of course, we had that letter from Jack Ma to shareholders that Alibaba would have to differentiate itself more from, you know, regular e-commerce companies. It's not just enough to be an e-commerce company. You have to be something more, which rattled investors momentarily. Of course, Singles Day is coming up in
Singles Day,
November.
which is a fake.
Well,
it's
all
a fake.
All right.
Yeah, but they still sell it.
No, but they sell it over the course of many, many days. They report the number on one day, and they've already got PR people out there. They're already hounding me by email and things saying, it's the biggest shopping day of the year. Well, it's the biggest shopping week or shopping month of the year. They might record them in one day, but it happens over time. Yeah, so the notion of Singles Day as a singular event is exaggerated by their accounting for that, and which is being examined for that exaggeration.
So let's talk about the actual results, though, and the efforts to be more transparent. I mean, are they actually more transparent?
Are there efforts to be more transparent?
Right.
I'm unaware of said efforts. It would be good of them to be more transparent. I don't expect them to do so.
Well, you know, what I think, a couple of things on Alibaba. Number one, I think this investment that you just talked about is going to be interesting longer term because it really puts them in an Amazon-like position where they've got these content services as well as that. But as far as the near term, the only question I would have is we've heard rumblings about some issues on the Chinese economy. And does that start to impact them a little bit? My guess is probably not immediately, but again, longer term, are there some concerns there? Because the part of the economy that supposedly is being hit would seem matches very well with what Alibaba sells to right now.
Facebook coming up also this week. The biggest company of the week, for sure.
And maybe the most important earnings report, too, at least in terms of the impact of the market. Facebook's seen a really impressive reacceleration of user growth. Right, just as we see Twitter just sputtering when it comes to user growth, the numbers we've seen out of Facebook have been very impressive. And what we've seen from them is an increase in not just the number of users, but the pace in which they are adding users, which is fairly amazing given the size of this business. And also the value of those users. They are able to charge more and more money to advertisers as their ads get more targeted. Dramatically more money. If you're looking at any basis, whether it's a sequential year-over-year straight dollar amount, $5.80 for average daily user is fantastic for this company. Heck, the $3.88 they were making 18 months ago was great. But the growth of that user value accelerating. So they're really hitting on all cylinders and growing in the way that they collect, not just add users.
And Bob, is it really just Facebook and Google in this, you know, digital advertising war? I mean, they are the heavyweights, and everyone is just nipping at their heels.
It's a fair assessment of it. I think that's a big issue. But even more interesting, to Corey's point, is look, they're figuring out other ways to generate more revenue. You've got, you know, they've got these messaging services they're adding. They've got direct commerce services they're adding. It's pretty impressive how they're really extending themselves. And
more juice from the lemon.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and the other question is, you know, there's been this discussion. There's a story on the, you know, Wall Street Journal today. Are they a media company or are they a tech company? Because we know media company valuations are significantly lower than tech company valuations. And of course, you know, Sheryl Sandberg said, well, we're a tech platform company, and they seem to be proving that. But the question is, you know, can they continue to innovate in that regard? And I think certainly for the near term, absolutely. And I expect them to have big results as well.
All right, let's talk Oracle NetSuite. Is it going to happen, Corey?
I don't know. So you would think they're certainly playing hardball. You know, I interviewed Safra Katz just a few weeks ago talking about this very subject, about, you know, are you going to go higher with this bid? T-Roll's very clear they want more money in this deal. T-Roll prices in the driver's seat because of the corporate governance policies that Oracle put in place. But Safra Katz, you tell me if you think she looks flexible here. Here's what she had to say to me. A brief answer from Safra.
We've offered $109. The board accepted that, and every shareholder is going to have to make his own decision. But we believe that is the price.
So on top of that, Mark Hurd came back and said, it's our best and final offer.
I mean,
You're still saying we want more.
If you can read that poker face, because I can read that. That face looks pretty resolute to me. I don't know that T-Roll's going to get much more.
So hang on. If this doesn't happen, is that bad for NetSuite? Is that bad for Oracle?
I think it's bad for both NetSuite and Oracle. I also don't think another bidder is going to emerge. I mean, we saw from the leaked Colin Powell documents. Did you see this? The Salesforce deck that was part of the board members. The Colin Powell documents showed us that Salesforce doesn't want to put a bid because they don't think they'll get it, because Larry Ellison still controls most of the stock. So there's not likely to be a second bidder out there if Salesforce won't buy them and anyone else won't buy them. So T-Roll might want to take what they can get here.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, it seems to me that NetSuite could lose more than Oracle would in this particular case, because I agree with Corey. Based on that ownership, clearly it's going to be tough for somebody else in a similar market, unless somebody completely from the outside comes around. But I'm not sure that makes long-term sense. So given that, I think Oracle's the obvious choice. And yeah, I think they're probably going to end up going with it. Maybe the deal doesn't happen now and they delay it another couple of months, but eventually, or years. But I think eventually it will probably happen based on that ownership relationship.
All right. Bob O'Donnell of Technalysis, Corey Johnson, our editor-at-large. It's a big week of earnings. We will be all over them. Thank you both. Now to a story that is trending. New research has found racial discrimination by Uber and Lyft drivers. A study of 1,500 rides in Seattle and Boston found drivers canceled rides for men with black-sounding names more than twice as often as other passengers. It also showed black people face notably longer wait times for a car. The research has been published by MIT, Stanford University, and the University of Washington. Both San Francisco-based companies say they do not tolerate discrimination. Coming up, Elon Musk unveils his latest project, and it's not a self-driving car or a rocket to Mars. We'll look into Tesla's first ever solar product next. This is Bloomberg. A stock we are watching, Tesla shares fell after the company unveiled its first ever solar product. The so-called solar roof was CEO Elon Musk's closing argument to investors on why they should approve the controversial merger with SolarCity. Bloomberg's Tom Randall explains Musk's plan for a solar energy trifecta.
Take a look at the roofs of these 4 houses. Can you spot which one is covered in solar cells? That's a trick question, because they all are. Tesla just unveiled its first ever solar product, and it's stunning. It's not a solar panel. Instead, it's a range of 4 solar roofing materials that look virtually indistinguishable from high-end terracotta, slate, or slick modern asphalt shingles.
People really care about their homes. They love their homes, and they really want them to be better. And I think taking this approach, it can be.
Here's how it works. The top of the roof tile is made of textured glass. It looks like shingles from most angles, but it allows sunlight to pass through from above and into a standard solar cell with almost no loss in efficiency. Tesla says the glass is as tough as steel and can weather a lifetime of abuse from the elements. It can also be fitted with heating elements to melt off snow in colder climates.
You want to call your neighbors over and say, check out the sweet roof. It's like not a phrase that you hear often.
This represents the grand unification of Tesla's plans to become a sun-to-vehicle energy company. The idea is that you can run your home on solar power, store it in a slim battery that hangs on your wall, and then use that electricity to power your home and car. Tesla also doubled the capacity of that Powerwall battery, creating the world's cheapest lithium-ion storage to extend rooftop solar power into the night. This combination is perhaps the closest we've ever come to affordable off-grid electricity, though Musk was still a little fuzzy on the pricing details.
The goal is to make solar roofs that look better than a normal roof, generate electricity, last longer, have better insulation, and actually have an installed cost that is less than a normal roof plus the cost of electricity. So then why would you buy anything else?
The solar roof was Musk's closing argument to shareholders before their vote to approve Tesla's $2.2 billion bid to buy the biggest U.S. rooftop solar installer, SolarCity, to make it all possible. There are plenty of reasons to be skeptical, but if Musk can pull it off, this trifecta of Tesla products, the solar roof, the Powerwall 2, and the Model 3 electric car, will be available in Tesla stores across the U.S. at the end of 2017.
Bloomberg's Tom Randall there. Coming up, Khosla Ventures founder Vinod Khosla sits down for an exclusive interview on Bloomberg Studio 1.0. We discuss everything from his investments in so-called black swans or companies that have a near complete chance of failure. Plus, why he thinks machines will take over all the jobs that exist today, the majority, that is, in 40 years. This is Bloomberg.
I'm Mark Crumpton. You're watching Bloomberg Technology. Let's begin with a check of first word news. CNN says it is, quote, completely uncomfortable to learn through WikiLeaks that former commentator Donna Brazile had contacted the Clinton campaign ahead of time about a question that would be posed during a presidential primary town hall. The material released today from the hacked file of Clinton campaign chairman John Podesta reportedly revealed at least the second time Brazile had communicated to Clinton aides about questions the candidate might be asked on the air. Iraqi troops say they've captured the last village on the eastern outskirts of Mosul and are now less than a mile from the city limits. An offensive to retake Mosul from Islamic State is now in its third week. The UN humanitarian chief says if peace isn't reached in Yemen soon, the country could collapse. Stephen O'Brien told the Security Council today about 21 million people need some form of help. Complicating matters, Yemen now has 61 confirmed cases of cholera. 1,700 additional cases are suspected. In China, there are reports that 13 miners have been killed and 20 others trapped after a gas explosion. China is the world's largest producer and consumer of coal, but has announced plans to close more than 1,000 old mines. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg. It's just after 6:30 p.m. Monday here in New York, 9:30 Tuesday morning in Sydney. My colleague Paul Allen has a look at the markets. Paul, good morning.
Good morning, Mark. Well, let's start off in New Zealand as always. Up and running for 90 minutes on Tuesday so far and already off 1/5%. Futures indicate that the ASX is expected to be off by the same amount at the open at the top of the hour, while Nikkei futures are looking a little weaker right now. A lot of earnings coming out of Japan today. Asahi, Sharp, Sony, Sumitomo, just to name a few. But a lot of the action will be focused on the Japanese yen today, with the Bank of Japan holding its policy meeting, expecting to see the cash rate left unchanged at -0.1%. But we will be watching for any information on inflation and growth targets, and also any information on how the Bank of Japan might want to meet its target for the 10-year yield. It's worth watching the Australian dollar as well, with the Reserve Bank of Australia also holding its meeting today. Again, the cash rate expected to stay unchanged at this record low 1.5%. Third quarter inflation last week was still weak, but showed some improvement. 22 of the 28 economists surveyed say there's going to be no change to that cash rate. The new Governor, Philip Lowe, suggesting that he might be willing to tolerate weaker inflation for longer. I'm Paul Allen in Sydney. More from Bloomberg Technology next.
This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. Turning now to Bloomberg Studio 1.0, where we speak to the biggest influencers in media and technology. This week, we sit down with Vinod Khosla, co-founder of Sun Microsystems and later Khosla Ventures, the venture capital firm behind companies like Hampton Creek, Square, and Zenefits. I started by asking about his humble beginnings in Delhi, India, and the road from founder to venture capitalist.
We started another company called The Data Dump. About 3 months before we started Sun, Scott McNeely and me were founders of both companies. And I love this story for the following reason. Nobody remembers your failures, even though the probability of success was low on either. This is great about entrepreneurship. Failure doesn't matter, but one's willingness to fail gives one the ability to succeed. If you're not willing to take risks, if you're not willing to fail, you're not going to do anything interesting, because most interesting things are new, and new things involve risk, and risk involves failure.
Why did you leave when you did, and what was your biggest takeaway?
Before Sun and before Data Dump, I'd started a company called Daisy Systems, and Daisy was quite successful. In '86, it went public. And frankly, Daisy made more money for me than I thought I needed ever in my life. And so I then wanted the freedom. And I looked at careers like, what else should I do? So I joined Kleiner Perkins, which was one of my lead investors, to essentially mentor and help entrepreneurs.
How does the venture industry back then compare to today?
There's many more venture capitalists now, many bad ones, a few good ones. And entrepreneurs should understand that. I get in trouble for saying that. But I think it is much more dynamic. Entrepreneurs have many more options, and that's really great for entrepreneurs, and I love that.
You got multiple degrees, an engineering degree at the India Institute of Technology, biomedical engineering at Carnegie Mellon, an MBA at Stanford. And you wrote this Medium post called, "Is Majoring in Liberal Arts a Mistake for Students?" where you indicated it doesn't necessarily set you up for success. This caused some controversy, which I know you're not shy about. One commenter wrote, "The real assertion here is that the purpose of human existence is fundamentally tied to the accumulation of wealth." What is your response?
That's a nonsensical response. And what liberal arts has become is an excuse to do less work. That's not everybody. And I speak to the 80% of students who actually do it for the wrong reason. But bottom line, if liberal arts goals are the goal, then liberal arts as taught today and taken today is the wrong curriculum.
So what should they be studying?
Logic and philosophy should be an absolute part of any liberal arts curriculum, because otherwise you don't learn how to think. Linguistics, economics, learning how computers work, because we live in a computer age. Why require a second language that's French or some esoteric language when the most important second language is computing? Not that most people ever need to code, but because it's a style of thinking. The critique is all from people who I feel failed to understand what I was saying, which is exactly the point I was making. So their comments, like the one you mentioned, reinforce the notion they didn't get a good education.
Do you think college is important at all? Should kids go to college? I mean, Peter Thiel is paying them not to.
So I disagree with Peter. I think college, curriculum, even high school are very important. There are people who will do well without an education, and people who will do well no matter what subject they take. Leaving aside those people, the top 10 or 20%, I think college gives you a grounding to be able to do things that adapt over time.
Vinod Khosla there on Bloomberg Studio 1.0. We'll have more of that exclusive conversation next when Khosla gives us his take on the gender gap in Silicon Valley. This is Bloomberg. In part two of our conversation with Khosla Ventures founder Vinod Khosla, we talk about the advice he gives to entrepreneurs. I started by asking why he believes most VCs actually hurt rather than help companies. Take a listen.
You know, applying traditional business school and business metrics to innovative startups is the wrong thing. And when people focus on IRRs and rates of return on boards, they actually hurt a company. I don't believe just because you're an investor, you earn the right to advise an entrepreneur by being a board member. If you're going to advise entrepreneurs, you should have started companies, known how hard and painful it is, how difficult the trade-offs are. It is painful being an entrepreneur. Life is not easy. And unless you have empathy for an entrepreneur by having done it yourself, you don't have the right to advise an entrepreneur, in my view. So one rule I have, in 30 years, I've never, ever voted against an entrepreneur. They don't need hypocritical politeness from board members trying to be popular and be their friends and not help them think through all the risks they're going to face and challenge them. And then these same board members want to vote on things as if they know enough to vote. They don't.
You also don't go to board meetings if you can help it.
Mostly I don't go to board meetings because I can't stand to listen to other VCs talk about things that I actually think hurt an entrepreneur.
So what's your advice to CEOs and entrepreneurs about how to be a CEO and how to not be a CEO?
So first, don't take advice because it's from the board. Just ignore the board to the maximum extent you can. But consider the input of people who have real experience as input to your thinking.
So, and this is interesting because there, you know, we've talked about the lack of women in the venture capital industry. I know you're looking hard for a woman partner, but what do you think it takes to be a successful VC? Do you need to have a STEM degree? I know some of your top partners don't. Do you need to have been a founder? Do you need to have been a CEO?
You don't need to have a STEM degree. It helps because you're dealing with technologists and speaking their language makes it easier. So it does help. But probably, and this is not even essential, but the most important requirement is having been an entrepreneur.
Is that why it's so hard to find women to fill these roles?
I think there's fewer women who've been entrepreneurs. So I think as women play more of an entrepreneurial role, and that's increasing, and we have many, many entrepreneurs who are women, even in very deeply technical areas. They, when they get enough experience, will be great partners. But you need the flow at the bottom to increase. And we need to encourage more women to be entrepreneurs.
You mentioned you have a broad range of investments: rockets, food, AI, health, finance, energy, companies with a usually high failure rate. And you say every 4 to 5 years you go deep into an area you know nothing about. What's worked? What hasn't worked?
First, all of them have worked in the sense I've really enjoyed learning a new area. Now, it'll be 5 years before I know I'm right or wrong. But independent of whether the companies are successful or not, I think I will have learned a lot. I think the two most important things that can happen in technology and that would really change humanity for the better is artificial intelligence and nuclear power, unlimited energy. I can't think of any two things that would impact humanity more than those two things.
You recently tweeted, if AI scenario happens, we'll have abundant GDP to take care of everyone, but great disparity. Only people who want to work may need to work. Paint the picture for us.
If AI does what humans can do, or most of it, I think it's pretty likely in 40 years of all the jobs that exist today, the majority, more than 50%, will be done by machines. And it doesn't matter whether it's a farm worker, a hamburger flipper, a legal researcher, a radiologist, a pathologist, or an oncologist. So it's not just the low-skill works. If that happens, we'll have dramatic GDP growth, dramatic productivity growth, all the traditional economic metrics. And because more people are out of work, more income disparity. It's hard to say whether it'll happen in 30 years or 50 years, but it will, I'm pretty sure, happen.
But what happens to all those people who don't have a job?
Critical question is, how do we fairly address the people who are left out of this? And it'll be most of the people. The good news is we will have enough GDP to provide basic income to everybody. I know it sounds horrific, but we will have the resources. If per capita income is $150,000, $200,000, $300,000, I think some sort of basic income as per capita income climbs above $100,000 will become very, very important, and that'll be a social and political issue we have to address.
Vinod Khosla there, founder of Khosla Ventures. More of Bloomberg Studio 1.0 next when we dive into Khosla's take on the future of eggless mayo maker and controversial company Hampton Creek. This is Bloomberg. Returning to my exclusive conversation with Vinod Khosla, founder of Khosla Ventures and investor in Hampton Creek, the eggless mayo maker. In August, Bloomberg reported the SEC and the Justice Department had launched probes into Hampton Creek for possible securities violation and criminal fraud, including buying its own mayo off the shelves to juice sales. I asked Khosla for his thoughts on the troubled company's future.
There was a Bloomberg article recently. The reporter believed Ali Partovi, an ex-employee, who bought some stock, then accused the company of giving false information. I would have bought Ali's stock. The company offered to buy his stock. If he thought he was defrauded, why didn't he sell the stock back and not lose a penny? He could have gotten his money back and gone away. Mark Benioff is an investor. He didn't feel defrauded. His wife's on the board. Lynn's on the board. She looked at the details. Now, maybe there's other stuff we'll discover, and I can't say what else I'll discover. I personally went and talked to Ali. He didn't have one credible allegation. He suggested talk to these 3 other people. I went and talked to those 3 other people.
So do the allegations bother you? Do they concern you?
Look, first, every company, anytime they have employees who leave, have allegations. Sometimes, probably 20, 30% of the time, they're right. 70, 80% of the time, they're just bitterness. We look into them whenever it's serious. I won't comment on the specifics, but suffice to say, we are always looking. Entrepreneurs push the edges. Is the buyback relevant? The $77,000 reported, completely irrelevant to our investment decision. Why is somebody investigating? Ask the question. Do you know, under a Freedom of Information request, the American Egg Board was plotting to destroy Hampton Creek because the egg industry hated them. Unilever sued Hampton Creek for calling their mayor, and then withdraw the lawsuit when they realized how bad it was. So there are many, many enemies the company has, including using federal funds in the Department of Agriculture to target a company. There's emails that were discovered by a reporter in Washington that said, how can we prevent them from getting distribution at Whole Foods? Now, why would a federal agency be trying? Why? Because there's interests involved here. People, again, who are being disrupted and will get hurt. So I'll tell you it's a complex story, but I can't go into specifics.
How would you describe your faith in the CEO, Josh Tetrick, and your faith in Hampton Creek as a company? Do you still think this will be a winner in your portfolio? Do you still think this company can transform the food chain as we know it?
Hampton Creek has already done a lot to change the food chain. They brought sensitivity into the fact that all male chicks, when they're born, are crushed live in hoppers. It's just horrific. He's changing that practice, bringing visibility to it. Caged hens, he's bringing visibility to it. Are they making a difference? Absolutely. Even if they're not successful, they will have made a difference by bringing visibility to these real issues that the egg industry is trying to distract from. As far as CEO is concerned, we normally talk to his team and see, do the team support the CEO? When they don't, we have to have a conversation with the CEO. Do CEOs make mistakes? Absolutely. Do we make mistakes? Absolutely. It's a constant evaluation process.
You're very passionate about clean tech. You've made a lot of investments here. Some people would say that, investors like you and John Doerr made a mistake by going too far into this field. What have you learned from it, and what is your response to that?
Clean tech is an important area. Climate change is an important risk. Now, I view climate change no different than I view homeland security, nuclear proliferation, terrorism. They're all risks society faces, and we should insure against them. Now, how much of our GDP do we spend insuring against foreign attack, national defense, homeland security? We should treat climate change the same way. It's a business decision on how much insurance to buy. We should encourage new competitive technologies to come up and then stop supporting them when they get to a certain size. It's time to stop supporting wind. Maybe even solar should be, the subsidies should start to decline.
Really?
We've done okay in clean tech. We probably have 6 companies that could be worth $1 billion still, but I'd rather try and fail than fail to try, something that's really important.
It's clear you care deeply about the environment. You are incredibly philanthropic. You've pledged to give away half of your wealth. Yet, one of the stories that gets written about you most is about a lawsuit that you're involved in around public access to your beach. Some people would say that's at odds.
I normally don't like to talk about things under litigation, but giving up half your wealth, it won't affect my lifestyle. So it's not a huge sacrifice to sign up for the Giving Pledge. What I find is I can spend more of my time working on technology. I'll probably have way more impact than from my giving. The other half of that is having principles, having a point of view, having a belief system. It's amazing to me how many Fortune 500 CEOs read the press, read Wall Street Journal, and respond to it instead of saying, here's what we believe in as a company. Passionate entrepreneurs like Elon Musk or Larry Page or Mark Zuckerberg, they have a passion that far exceeds their sort of desire for short-term profit. And because of that, they make more wealth and more profit over the long haul. In fact, wealth is just a tool to give you freedom to do what you want to do. And many people, especially people like Trump, get trapped into this cycle of making more. That's not that interesting. And doing all the deals, he thinks it's smart to avoid taxes. It just blows my mind. I'm religious about my belief systems. So when I have a battle on the beach, back to your question, it's about property rights. And about a set of people who want to use coercion In fact, they told me they'd like to embarrass me into giving up my rights. Well, if you have a belief system, even though it's unpopular, even though the press all knocks you for it, you want to live by your principles. Whether it's that or protecting private property rights and fighting for what the law is, and when it's not clear, and there's clearly some things that are not clear in the law, it's important to get them legally resolved.
Our exclusive interview there with Vinod Khosla, founder of Khosla Ventures. And do not miss our exclusive with former Microsoft CEO Steve Ballmer. He will be on Bloomberg Studio 1.0 next week. Now to the biggest tech mover of the day, Brocade Communications. The network equipment maker jumped more than 22% after Bloomberg's M&A team reported it's in advanced talks to sell itself. This according to people familiar with the matter, who also said the chip maker Broadcom is believed to be one of the potential buyers. An acquisition could be announced as soon as this week. Brocade has struggled to grow its networking business, which competes with much bigger rival Cisco. And speaking of deals, the two biggest daily fantasy sports sites are close to joining forces under the leadership of DraftKings co-founder Jason Robbins. This according to people familiar with the merger talks. Robbins is expected to serve as CEO of the combined company, which is still unnamed. Investors have been encouraging a tie-up for months as the two companies have spent millions competing against one another and fighting legal battles. That does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. Tomorrow, tune in for full coverage of Square's latest earnings report, another crucial test for CEO Jack Dorsey after Twitter's earnings last week. And remember, all episodes of Bloomberg Tech are now live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Bloomberg Tech TV weekdays, 6 p.m. in New York, 3 p.m. in San Francisco. That's all for now. This is Bloomberg.